right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to welcome everyone. My name is Ellie Richardson, and I'm a kids librarian from the Arlington Heights Memorial Library. Welcome to tonight's program, Closing the Gap, Supporting Your Developing Reader. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Barb Fitzsimons. You'll see Barb on the speakers on the corner here. If you want to see her a little bit bigger, you can go ahead and click on those three dots and pin her there. And I'll go ahead and spotlight her there for everyone, and you can shift that to see her bigger or smaller. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Barb. Thanks for coming here tonight, and thanks for presenting with us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks, Ellie. Ellie has been a ton of help with pulling this together, so I'm glad everybody could come tonight. And again, just want to welcome you and introduce myself so you know who's presenting to you tonight. So I'm a longtime resident of Arlington Heights and a recent retiree. I taught in Park Ridge, District 64, was 14 years as a first grade teacher, 7 years as a reading interventionist. And then I finished my career as an instructional coach for reading and writing for kindergarten through second grade. So I raised my three kids here in Arlington Heights and have taken part in lots of programs here at the library. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my time, in addition to taking care of my grandkids, my youngest son suggested I do something with the library. So that's how this came to be. So hopefully this will be helpful. I'm probably going to do a lot of talking to get through a lot of material as quickly as possible so that we have time at the end to answer your questions. So here we go. So learning to read, as you know, is a developmental process that happens differently for each child. So early reading behaviors will appear at different times and will change as emergent readers progress. So this evening, I want to take you through the stages and describe some reading behaviors to look for as you guide your emergent reader and team with educators to support your kids toward reading independence, which is really what we want. So remember, these are just some behaviors to look for. New readers will display some and not others. They'll also display reading behaviors we don't expect. So as long as they're growing in their skill and especially their love for reading, it's all good. So the first stage is the pre-reading stage, happening from birth to when they start reading on their own. And again, I'm just going to highlight a few of the behaviors that you can look for in your own kids. And remember, it's okay if your child's not displaying all these behaviors. It's also okay for your child to be in this pre-reading stage when they enter kindergarten. So do any of these books look familiar to you? I chose a few that my kids and my students would beg me to read over and over again. You might notice that your pre-reader will begin to monitor your reading and complain if you skip a page or say a wrong word. They'll start to repeat many of the pages word for word. They might begin to sing song along with rhymes. They'll begin to have their favorites. And those books, and I remember many of them from my kids that you feel like you just can't read one more time, and you'll go crazy if you do. Those are the books that are laying the groundwork for your new reader. So keep reading them to them. They hear and start to imitate your cadence, so the cadence of an experienced reader, and they develop mostly a positive attitude about books and about the time that they spend with you and with other family members and with their teachers. Long before they recognize words in books, your pre-readers are going to recognize signs from their favorite places, TV shows, they're going to recognize labels from their toys, and this is what's considered environmental text. So they'll, point out a stop sign, or they'll say, oh, there's the Target sign. This is the one that my kids recognize first, McDonald's. So this isn't a time for you to skill and drill your kids, but just take notice of what they're noticing. You can start to draw their attention to what you notice about the sign. Say things like, oh, that's a really long word, or it's a short word, or that word starts with the same letter in my name, or that word has 9 letters, or the sign has 1 word. All those observations should just kind of happen naturally in conversation. And you don't really have to expect any response from your child. They'll just kind of soak it in, and they might start doing the same thing when they notice signs, point out different things they notice about them. So pre-readers are their own favorite people. Their names are special to them, and their name is usually one of the first words they recognize. As a first grade teacher, that was always something that we did at the beginning of the school year, just kind of using their names to make comparisons with letters and things like that. So start to play games with the letters in their name. You can cut them apart and have your child put them back together. You can post their name in their bedroom, on your refrigerator, label their toys, and point to the letters in their names. Say things like, "Oh, your name starts with an O, so does the word octopus," or your name ends with an A, like in apple or acorn. But in your name, it makes kind of a different sound at the end, Olivia. You don't have to really explain it further than that. Just kind of point some things out to them so they're noticing those letters. And then continue with other special names like Dada and Mama and Grandma and Papa. Notice them whenever you can and point them out to your kids. What letter is Dada's? What letter is Grandma's? And then include the connecting sounds, even if your child can't yet isolate or produce those sounds. So you might say something like, Dada's name starts with a D sound, just like dog. Letter puzzles, magnet letters, letter blocks, those will all give your child a chance to see the same letters in different styles and different fonts. So pre-readers should eventually be able to name all the letters in the alphabet, and lots of exposure in a variety of ways will help. So again, that's naming the letters. That doesn't mean they need to know all the sounds, just the names of the letters to begin with. So establish a regular read aloud routine. The time doesn't have to be lengthy, but it should be fun. And whenever possible, try to establish it at the same time of day. And before you know it, your child will start to look forward to this time and begin begging you for more books. They probably already do that. But give your child plenty of opportunities to interact with all kinds of books. Let them see how you interact with books too. And some things for you to notice is, how does your child pick up and open a book and leaf through the pages? Do they, hold it right side up? Do they leaf from front to back? Are they starting to repeat rhyming patterns from their favorite books? Can they sit and listen for extended periods of time and beg for more? That's a really important one, just getting their attention span to lengthen for listening to books. So all these behaviors show reading development or reading readiness. So this is the next stage, and you're going to notice in this one, early emergent, I've also included underneath levels A through B. So that A and B is just a text level.
Sorry.
This
I'm gonna
happens.
Go ahead and fix this again. I'm so sorry.
Is it not showing?
It's not showing up again. Let me go ahead. It's just not progressing.
Technical
So I'm gonna go ahead.
Did it go beyond that one?
No, it's
Oh no.
I'm so sorry. I realized. Do you mind if we do it this way?
Yeah,
Where you
no,
see
that's
this?
fine.
Okay.
That's fine. I won't be able to see my notes, but
Is that okay?
I'm not sure.
All right.
I'll try.
All right.
So anyways, so I'm gonna wing this. It's all coming out of my head now. So
Thank you.
yeah. So anyways, that A and B, that is a Fountas and Pinnell level, which just happens to be a particular leveling system. There's lots of different leveling systems, probably most common in this area in these school districts. They'll use Fountas and Pinnell, so you'll see that A and B. Really all it is telling you the type of text or the text complexity that your child should be able to read. So early emergent readers would read an A or B level text. So one thing I wanted to point out here, obviously, because I have it highlighted, is high frequency words. So you'll hear me reference high frequency words throughout this program. And basically what a high frequency word is at this level of text, in this complexity of text, those are the words kids are going to see most often. So those are the ones we want them to be able to read automatically. And those will progress as their reading level progresses. So the other thing that kids will start to do at this level is they're going to start to differentiate between what is a word and what is a letter. So previous to this, they kind of looked at the marks on the page and they knew you were looking at them and you were reading to them, but they didn't know what a word was or a letter, or if they, you asked them to count the words, they might count the letters in the words. So at this point, they should be able to say there's 3 words in this sentence, or there's 4 letters in this word. So they're able to tell the difference. The other thing that they're going to start to do at this level or at this stage is they're going to be able to match one-to-one when they read a page. So they can point and say, a big house, a big dog, I see blue, I see green. And they're going to notice that at the end of each sentence, the word is different. So in order to be able to read that changing word, they should start to notice what letter that word starts with. And also they'll probably use the picture to help them figure it out. And all that's good and appropriate for this stage. So the next thing you might notice with your child at this emergent stage of reading is that they're going to be able to locate the title of a book. They're going to know where to begin reading, and they're going to start to understand the story. So they'll also start to kind of point around the pages in the book and say more about what they see, point out things that are interesting to them, and they'll spend a little bit more time with the books. So another thing that you might notice with your kids, or you should notice with your kids at this stage of reading, is that they're going to read words in sequence from left to right, but they're also going to notice that a sentence doesn't necessarily end when the page runs out of space. They're going to understand that they have to then sweep back to the left in order to keep reading. So what kind of animal has these spots? A cheetah has these black spots. So they'll know that the sentence doesn't end until they see or start to see and notice punctuation. And that's called a return sweep. So the next stage of reading, and again, you see those levels underneath, those are, again, Fountas and Pinnell levels, saying that at an emergent reading level, children should be able to access text that is at a C or D level. Okay, so they'll demonstrate the use of strategies from their previous levels, and I want to point that out because that's true of every stage. They're going to start to stack up on these new strategies that they have and add them to their bag of tricks. They're going to use letters, the beginning, middle, and ending sounds to figure out words, and simple words where the vowel in the middle is going to be what we call a short vowel. So A says ah, I says I, U says ah. Those are the first sounds that they're going to learn. And again, we're seeing those high frequency words. There's going to be more and more of those high frequency words, and they'll recognize those in a variety of contexts. I wanted to point out the reading fluently on repeated reads at this stage. So what you'll notice here with your reader is that the first time they read something, they might be kind of choppy and robotic. But if they go back and read it again, with each subsequent reread, they should start to smooth it out. And so when we talk about someone reading fluently, we're just talking about that smooth reading in a natural voice using expression, and this is probably a piece that's left off often, but their expression should indicate that they understand what they're reading. So if they are reading a question, their voice should sound like a question. If they are reading something that's sad, then their voice might change to indicate they understand that. Okay, so at this stage, they're also going to, as I mentioned, use those initial, final, and short vowel sounds. So this is what we're talking about. In a word like not, you would hear your child go n, ah, t, not. So they wouldn't just break the sounds apart, they would also blend them back together to make a word. It, sit. And then they're going to use their growing number of high frequency words in a variety of contexts. So on these pages, they should automatically recognize the word the, my, can. Those are words they already know, so they don't have to slow down to figure those ones out. So again, with developing fluency, that growth in the high frequency words is really what's going to add to their fluency, because they no longer have to slow down to figure out those words. The only words that they really have to slow down to figure out are the ones that are new to them. So again, on pages like this, they'll probably already know the words live and in and the and my, but they might have to slow down to figure out desert or sniffs or lunch. So the more high frequency words they know, the easier it's going to be and the more fluent their reading is going to be. So we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to help, but that's a really big piece of what families and parents can do to help, is to continue to introduce those high frequency words, those words they see the most in print, over and over again. I want to, while we're here, and again, I'm going off of not having my notes, but I know this is really important, that you may get confused sometimes when a teacher will say high frequency words, or another teacher might say sight words. The way to differentiate between the two is, as I stated, high frequency words are going to be words at a particular level of text that are really common, and you're going to see them a lot. Whereas sight word is a word that a child knows by sight. While those could be high frequency words, they might also be other types of words. So for example, if your child is a big dinosaur lover and has seen that word over and over again, that word dinosaur might be a sight word for them, even though it's not a high frequency word. So hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes words are used interchangeably, but really shouldn't be. They are different. Okay, so the other thing that your child is going to do at this stage is they're going to start to monitor their own reading. So they'll start to think about whether or not something looks right and sounds right and makes sense to them when they read it. So this is kind of an example. So looking at the picture, your child might say, my monkey went up over the houses. And notice that that word doesn't match what they said. They should at this stage immediately go back and go, oh, my balloon went up over the houses. So you might even notice them do that. The goal would be for them to do that at the point of error. So they might say something like, my balloon went up over the houses, or my balloon went up over the cow. Oh, no, my balloon went up over the farms. So they'll start to catch it almost as they're making the mistake. But the change at this stage is going to be that they're really monitoring themselves as they're reading and catching those errors. So the other thing kids will do at this stage is they're going to reread for structure and accuracy. So as a parent or somebody observing your child, a lot of this is going to happen in their heads, and you might not know exactly what they're doing, but what you'll notice is that they're going to stop, they'll pause, they might go back and reread, and hopefully the goal would be that once they reread, they can continue on because they've figured out the problem. Again, they're going to get more and more fluent as they repeat reading the same stories over and over again. And they're also going to be able to retell and discuss the story. So they'll retell in order, and they'll be able to add their own thoughts about the story. You know, I liked it, I didn't like it, my favorite part was. So they're going to get a little bit more engaged in the stories that they're reading. So I wanted to include this here. This is what both of these texts, one's fiction, one's nonfiction. This is a typical benchmark for the end of kindergarten. And so when I say benchmark, what I mean is this is an assessment that a teacher might give at a certain point, in this case, at the end of kindergarten, to check and see how your child is doing with their reading. So again, benchmark text is your child's teacher might say to you, your child is reading at benchmark, and they might tell you your child's reading at a level D. But really so what they're saying is that your child has the skills to access appropriate level text. Now, on the flip side, if they say to you, your child is not reading at benchmark, they might, be referring to some weaknesses that they might have that is making this print inaccessible to them. So all I've included here on the lower part is some of what's appropriate in a benchmark level text for the end of kindergarten. So what I really want to make sure that you understand is that don't be afraid to ask about the benchmark information. Again, you may have been in these conferences before where they'll just label your child as a level. That level is not your child. That level is the book that they're able to access. So don't be afraid to ask about the benchmark information and what it tells you about your child as a reader. Ask the teacher, what are my child's strengths? What are their weaknesses? And what did they notice about your child when they read? And if there are weaknesses that are preventing them from accessing that text, how will the teacher address those things in the classroom? And then most importantly, how can you help them with that? All right, so this is the next stage in reading. It's early. And again, the levels are E through F. What I wanted to point out here, again, they should demonstrate the use of strategies from previous levels. I wanted to point out that word decode. I use it over and over again. You may already know what it means, but basically it's your child looking through a word and being able to crack the code using what they know about letters and sounds and spelling patterns and things like that. We're also going to talk a little bit about inflected endings and reading from the base word to the whole word. So at this level, in order to be proficient at this level text, they'll start to recognize those inflected endings like ing, ed, ly, an s at the end of a word, and they'll be able to identify what was the base word before those things were added and use that information to decode the word. Early readers will begin to make predictions and ask questions about stories, characters, and information from informational text. So here's some of the skills that your child at this reading level should have to help them be proficient here. So reading from the beginning letters of words, this is something they start out doing, and really just look at that first letter. You might even notice your child look at the first letter and then guess what the word is based on context or possibly a picture. But here they're going to start to lean on those first letters to help them figure out the whole word. They'll reread to make sure that it makes sense. So you'll hear them doing that. And they'll start to use parts of the words that they know already. So for example, in the word play, they might notice that AY is something they've seen before, maybe in the word day, or they'll see the Y at the end of sticky and remember from another word that Y at the end of a word says that E sound. They'll see little chunks inside there like ER at the end of eater. So they'll have more information about parts And they're also going to start to encounter longer words in their books. So they'll learn to read all the way through the word in parts. And here's what we were talking about with those inflected endings. Being able to see that base word wag and add the ing onto it. Being able to see or recognize that base word jump and add ed. And then again, with elephant and alligator, those are longer words, and you should see your child reading all the way to the end and really looking for that end sound. So this is an example of an E level text. So again, you're going to notice that your child is going to be able to follow a story all the way through from beginning to end. And they're going to get more involved in the story, making comments, making predictions. They will pay attention to punctuation and phrasing. So simple things like a period or a question mark, a comma, and especially at this level, you're going to see quotation marks start to pop up. So your child will start to recognize that that means someone's talking, and they'll be able to tell which character is talking and which character is responding. So they'll read on as well as reread to maintain the meaning throughout the story. They'll use the text and the pictures to recall what's happened already, and also, as we said, to make those predictions in the story. So they might say, you know, in this picture here, Andy's seed went 4 steps away and Jay's went 5. Your reader might notice, oh, there's a bird sitting there on the bench. They might say something like, oh my gosh, I think that bird's going to take his seed. And then they'll be able to check to see if their prediction was correct. All just showing that your child is more engaged in what they're reading at this particular stage. They're going to be able to retell and discuss information from informational text. So informational text at those really early stages is very simplistic. There's not much of it, but when we get to this reading stage, there starts to be more nonfiction. So if you have a child that's really interested in nonfiction, they're doing a little bit better at writing things that are accessible to kids in those early stages. But when they get to this stage, they'll start to find more things that they really like, and they'll be able to read them and then talk about them, share their thoughts about it, share their wonderings and their questions about it. So the next stage is called transitional. And this stage is about spring of 1st grade. And here again, they're going to demonstrate all those strategies from the previous levels. They're going to continue to search for chunks of words, and they're going to add more and more things that they recognize to their repertoire. But what I wanted to highlight here is that the knowledge of long vowel patterns becomes really important for kids at this stage. There's going to be more and more words that have those complex patterns. And so the teachers will spend more time with introducing those sounds and those patterns. They could be 2 vowels together. In some cases, it might be a vowel and a consonant. But when we talk about a long vowel pattern, we're talking about a pattern where the vowel will say its name. So A will say A, or O will say O, or a pattern like OI where it'll say oi, like a completely different sound, or OW that will say O or ow. So those are things that they really need at this transitional level to be independent with, so that they can crack that code with those new words. Something else you might notice at this transitional reading stage is that your transitional reader will make the shift from reading out loud to reading silently. They might sub-vocalize too, so you'll hear them kind of whisper reading, and then eventually it'll just be reading in their heads. So this is what I was talking about with chunks and words. You might see some of these worksheets come home from school so that they can practice and be introduced to some of these chunks, but really we want them working authentic text where they can use their knowledge. So instead of having to stretch out the word stand, they can just say stand. They'll notice a word they know right away, jumping, and be able to add that ing immediately because they know that chunk. Or full at, they'll do a blend and then add the chunk to it. So all of this again adds to their fluency because they can figure out unknown words more quickly. Here's some examples of what I was talking about with long vowel sounds. EA, AY, OA. They'll also learn that some of these make more than one sound. So the more they know about long vowel sounds, the more they can sort of play with what they know. If they get to a word with an EA in it, they might think to themselves, you know, is this word gonna say like in the word head, or is it going to say E like in the word bead, or is OO going to say like in book, or oo like in pool? So the fact that they know that gives them an opportunity to kind of play around with those sounds until they come up with a word that makes sense to them in the text that they're reading. They're also going to continue to monitor their own reading. So inside their heads, they're going to be thinking to themselves, does it make sense? Does it look right? They're going to check, go back and reread. And again, you're not going to hear them do this necessarily, but you're probably going to notice them going back, rereading, and moving on from there. One of the other things that you're going to notice at this level text is that their reading is going to become smoother. Instead of reading a word at a time, like I like the yellow sand, they're going to start to scoop things together, words that go together. I like the yellow sand. And it's also going to, their expression will change. And again, they're going to start to reflect understanding in how they phrase longer sentences. So watch for that as well at this stage. They're going to be able to retell stories in logical sequence. Stories are getting a little bit longer, a little bit more complex. They're going to use transition words, and they're also going to use the names of the characters in the story. Instead of saying the boy or the girl, they'll say, you know, first, Tess and Nanny's mom told them that they were going to go to a birthday party. Next, Mom showed them the present, and they were confused that the present was bananas and apples. Then they got out of the car and walked slowly up to the zoo. Finally, they saw that the birthday was for an elephant, and they understood why the present was apples and bananas. So they'll start to use those transitional terms and be more specific about who they're talking about in the story. Again, in nonfiction, the nonfiction is going to get a little bit more complex, and they're going to be able to handle this level of complexity using visual supports when they're reading informational text. So they'll use the diagrams, and they'll use the headings and the charts and the captions. They'll notice the captions and understand that they're important to read. When they talk about these books that they've read, they're going to use those things that they saw in their books to support what they've learned, almost, you know, text evidence for them. They'll bring you the book and they'll show you that, you know, the food chain has 5 parts, and they'll be able to point that out to you. So this is the last stage we're going to talk about. This is early fluent, and this is the end of first grade. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about word segmentation and syllabification. That's a hard one to say. And decoding multiple syllable words. Again, you can see just in the picture, kids will be able to start to break those words apart by syllable, and they'll use chunks and generalize those chunks to other words that they've seen before. The other thing that's really exciting about this phase is that your early fluent reader is going to begin to explore a variety of text, different genres, and they're going to start to choose what they like best. So they'll talk about, oh, I really like realistic fiction because it's like I'm reading about something I can do. I really like nonfiction because I like to learn about new things. So they'll talk about and have opinions about what they like to read. So this is what I was talking about with the different syllables. So you can see that I've named the different syllable types. Generally, there's 6 syllable types. The expectation is not that your child is able to name each syllable type. The expectation is that they understand that words have parts and can be broken down into their parts. And based on what the part looks like, that is going to tell you how you say the vowel. So in rabbit, R-A-B is what we consider a closed syllable. Your child will just see that there's one vowel followed by a consonant, and that tells them that A is going to say a instead of a. So knowing that they can break words apart into pieces and kind of play around with them and focus on the fact that every piece has to have a vowel sound, that's going to give them opportunities to, try something, try again, and really do the work that it takes to get to the word. The other thing you're going to notice at this early fluent stage is that they're going to read more. They're going to be able to sustain their reading for longer periods of time, and the text that they're reading is going to be more complex. Could be early chapter books, might just be picture books that are a little bit more complex and have higher concepts than before. But again, you're going to see a shift because they can access so many different things. They're also going to be influenced quite a bit by peers and what everybody else is reading. And they'll take recommendations from other kids about what they're reading. They might find a series that they really like and want to read everything in that series, or they might ask you to find more and more nonfiction books about a particular topic. And so as I did before, I included what a benchmark text would look like for the end of first grade. So again, if a teacher says to you that your child is reading at benchmark, what they're saying is that they have the skills to access this level of text independently, which is the most important thing about it. They might also say that your child is instructional at this level of text. So in other words, they're getting there. They have a lot of the skills that it requires, but they're not totally independent yet. So your teacher is working, or their teacher is working with them at this level of text, supporting them just a little bit so that it's accessible to them. And as they do that, they'll get closer and closer to independence. And again, the teacher should be able to tell you, what are the things that are keeping your child from really being able to be independent at this level of text, and what skills, do they need to work on, and how is the teacher going to address that in the classroom? Okay, so those are the stages. And again, I apologize that I had to go all from memory. It's pretty much up here, but I did have some other details that hopefully I didn't leave anything out. But what I want to talk about now, which is hopefully why most of you are here, is how do you become part of the team and foster literacy skills at home? So one of the things that I think is really important is to be able to go into a meeting with a teacher with some questions in mind. So one of my favorite questions to ask, and also I I liked as a teacher when a parent would ask me this is, what do you notice about my child as a reader? It's kind of an open-ended question, but you should expect that the response would be something like, I notice that when your child reads and they get to a word they don't know, that they always do something. They always try something, or they start with the beginning sound. Or you might hear a teacher say, when your child gets to a tricky part, they look up at me instead of looking at the print. Things like that. So just in general, what do you notice about my child as a reader? Next question might be, what can I do to support literacy at home? So what did they suggest that you do? What are the best resources that we should consider using as a family to support our child in the classroom? So they could have a variety of things. Might be something that's on a computer and an app, or it might be just a simple practice at home. How do you personalize learning in your classroom? So do they use reading surveys to find out what your kids like and dislike, what their genre preferences are? Do they introduce favorite authors? Do they form small skill groups so that they can support kids who need practice in specific areas? And then do you use formative assessment in your classroom? So again, formative assessment can be anything really informal, like an observation, to maybe a spelling test, developmental spelling test that a teacher will give to the entire class. So finding out what the teacher uses for formative assessment, because formative assessment is what they should be using to drive their instruction for the whole class and also for individual students. So what does their formative assessment look like? Is it mostly formal? Is it mostly informal? And how does that drive their instruction? How do you know if my child's making progress? And can you share those formative assessments with me? So can I see them? And can you talk to me about what they're telling you? And some of them, be prepared. Some of them might be just like a little checklist that they have where they walk around the classroom and check to see what kids are applying certain skills that were taught. What learning barriers do you see for my child? What are you trying to address, what are you trying to address these barriers, and how can we help? And then what learning models do you use to teach literacy skills and reading in your classroom? So that should be more than them just telling you the program that the school district has adopted, because that's a resource, and a lot of times they're fabulous resources, but it doesn't really speak to how the teacher is teaching those literacy skills. So do they use shared reading? Is their classroom more of a structured literacy instruction? So when they're teaching specific skills, do they have a focus on phonics, guided reading? Do they use read aloud? And what's the primary benefit of their approach? And then most importantly, how do you measure my child's individual academic progress? So again, it's never, I always tell people that, you cannot compare your child to the progress of another child. Everybody progresses differently and at their own pace. The stages will be similar for every child, but when they meet them might be different. So you really want to know about the progress of your own child. This is one of my things that I like to drive home, that kids are not letters. So again, you'll hear the kids even say this sometimes, like I'm an I or I'm a J. The letters are referencing the text level. So what is the text level that your child can access and read independently? So this chart just kind of gives you information about these different text levels. So in kindergarten, the A through C is for readers who are beginning to learn sound symbol relationships. Emergent readers, D through J, which is first grade, are for readers with, who understand the alphabet, understand phonological awareness and early phonics, and then on as you go through the other grades for K through P, kids who are approaching independence and comprehending texts at different levels, and then on up. I wanted to include this reading level conversion chart just so you could see what I was talking about. Guided reading levels, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, those are the most common probably that you see from your kids' school. DRA is another leveling system where they use numbers. If they use accelerated reader at your school, those are the 1.0, 1.1, and then it just shows you the different developmental stages and what grades they're typically in when they're at those developmental stages. So what does my child's reading level tell me? Just that it tells you that those are the types of books that they can read independently. So how do you help them choose the right books? So that's really important. What I always used with my kids, just as something they could do independently, was an acronym called IPIC. Some of you might have heard that before. So I choose. You want the kids to have some opinion about what they're choosing. I have a purpose for what I'm reading. So am I reading it for fun? Am I reading it because someone recommended it to me? Because my teacher told me to? Because I'm doing a report? Am I interested? Can I understand what I'm reading? And do I know most of the words? Not some of the words, but most of them. Usually want kids reading at 95% accuracy, which again, you don't need to calculate. But when they're reading at 95% accuracy, they should be reading comfortably. There might be a few words that they have to stop and figure out, but not so many that they're frustrational or they lose the meaning. So I kind of wrap that up. So that's what you're going to notice if the book is just right. They're going to feel comfortable with it. They're going to finish it. They're going to choose other books like it. And if the book's too hard, they'll probably abandon it. They might get frustrated. They might be stopping a lot to figure out words. They won't be able to tell you anything about what they read when they finish reading the book. And if the book is low interest, you might see some of the same things that you see when a book's challenging. They'll abandon it. They won't be able to tell you what they read. They'll zip through it. They won't really be connected to the text and what they're reading. So what do I do when they get stuck? That's a question that parents always ask. So kids learn best when they have a scaffold to support them. So just like you did when you taught them how to tie their shoes or ride their bike, kind of run alongside them, let them be a little bit more independent little by little, and then eventually you let go and they go on their own. So it's breaking the lessons into more manageable pieces. So parents and teachers can provide that decreasing level of support as new readers master their skills. So when they do get stuck, what can you say? So the things that you want to start with are things that are kind of general and still put most of the heavy lifting on the kids. So you might say, what do you notice about that word? What do you know about that word? So they might say, oh, I see that it has an AY in it, or I see that it has an ED at the end. If they don't get it, then you might say something more specific, like stretch out the sounds, or wait a minute, something didn't sound right if they make an error and they didn't realize it. What can you do? Does something look familiar? So reinforcing spelling patterns. Do you see that A and D inside there? Oh, that's the little word and, or that's the little word it. And you might ask them too, do you need time or do you need help? Just so you're not jumping on right away and giving them the word, even though that's perfectly fine. If they've tried and they don't get it after a couple tries, just tell them the word, and that's perfectly fine too. This funnel kind of shows you a little bit better basically what I just talked about. Starting from the top, you're just kind of using those general questions. What can you do? What do you know? What can you figure out? How can you check? Wow, how did you do that? That's always a great one, because then they start to think about, well, what did I do? Because sometimes they go, well, I just knew it, but they actually are doing something. So if you can point that out too. And then on the left side there, that has to do with if they're having difficulty with the actual decoding. Sound it out, look at every letter, blend all the sounds together, read all the way through the word. And then if they're having problems with comprehension, you can ask them things like, what would make sense, or what would sound right, or look at the picture, use meaning to check. And so those are all things that you can try without telling them right away, so they can do the work. I included these benchmarks just so that you could kind of see school districts will be different, but generally speaking, in kindergarten, you'll start to see your child progress through these different levels of text from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Same thing in first grade, second grade, third grade, and so forth. And again, that's usually when a teacher will benchmark and kind of see where your child is at. So again, we're talking about the level of text that they can navigate and read independently. So finally, last but not least, my favorite thing, read aloud. This is really the best thing that you can do, and had a giant blurb all written out for you guys about read aloud, but I can talk about it with passion from my own experience. I did not become a teacher until I had children of my own. And so I had already started reading to them, not really realizing that the fun that I was having with my 3 sons, which I needed something to be able to do with my 3 boys, was actually helping them with their learning. So the more we read together, you know, they're hearing language, and that language is going to introduce to them all those things we talked about, all those sounds, all those spelling patterns, all those words and vocabulary. So the more they listen, that listening knowledge and that, you know, speaking language is going to flow. So their speaking language then flows to their reading language and their writing language. And that can all be accomplished through read aloud. So what makes read aloud so special? It gives kids a reason to want to be a better reader. It allows your child to focus on the meaning of the text rather than working on decoding. It builds family community. It allows access to texts that are otherwise too difficult. It develops your child's social imagination, so things they wouldn't have learned about or known about in the world. Gives your child a safe space to explore complicated topics. So quote there, read aloud makes readers, reading aloud makes writers, reading aloud changes lives. So what do you read to your kids? Well, I have some resources here that will help you with that. But what I want to tell you too is that, you know, I know a lot of your kids are going to be coming home with their book logs and are being asked to read 20 minutes a night. And sometimes that becomes a battle, and it's frustrating for them, frustrating for you. So read aloud is how you can ease that frustration. If your kids are battling you, then it might be because the books they're bringing home aren't good fits for them. It might be that they're not interested in them. There might be a lot of reasons why they don't want to read them. But most teachers will agree that reading to your child will do just as much and sometimes more than struggling to get them to read independently. If they're avoiding that reading time, again, like I said, there's a reason for it. The books they're reading may not be developed, you know, at their developmental reading level. They might not know what the reading genre is or be interested in it, and they may not understand the purpose for why they're reading the books. And more than likely, not in all cases, but in many cases, the books were selected for them. So it might not be an area of interest. So reading aloud to your child will expand their love for books and create a family routine that you'll never regret. All right, so these are the links. And again, I think Ellie's going to make these accessible to you. These are just some resources that can help you with book selection. But again, what I want to say about read aloud, as far as when to start, it's never too early. It's also never too late. Picture books are a great way to start with your young ones. But picture books are great all the way through elementary school, even on up into middle school and even high school. Picture books are written at all different levels and complexity. It's also it's not too early to start with simple chapter books with your younger kids. That's going to give them some endurance. They're going to get to listen to stories. They're going to have access to books that maybe they can't read yet, but their peers might be able to. And, you know, when they get there, they're going to have that vocabulary that they need to figure out unknown words. These links are also include those read aloud resources, but also have some additional literacy information, things about power words, literacy terms, and things that might be of interest to you. So again, I apologize for the technical difficulties with all of this, but I think that we'll wrap up now and see if there's any questions, and go from there. So Ellie?
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Barb. And yes, thank you everyone for going through our technical difficulties together. I think Barb, you did a fabulous job.
I'm thinking right now about all the stuff I left out. So again, I apologize for that.
No worries. That just means all the questions that you guys have,
Yeah,
we will be very
try and
welcome.
answer.
Yeah, we did have one in the chat from earlier. And as we're answering this question, if you all think of another question, feel free to send it or send it to me. But the one question that we did see was, are there any red flags that a parent should note that might signify a learning disability versus just being at a different stage of reading than their peers?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be different depending on how old your child is, you know, what developmental stages. But yes, it's hard to be specific about what the red flags are, but one of just a general red flag would be that if your child has received intervention services, if they have, you know, had support for a particular skill over a period of time and there's no progress that is happening, then that could be a red flag. It's really hard to talk in generalities about that, but you might notice that if your child's beyond kindergarten and into like mid or late first grade and they still don't have their directionality established, and I'm talking about, you know, going from left to right when they read or opening a book from the front to the back, not necessarily are they reversing their D's and their B's. That could continue to happen through into second grade and not necessarily signify anything major. But if you do notice they're having trouble like blending sounds together, that could be a red flag. If they're just like segmenting words apart, like not, and they're going forward, and when you ask them to blend it back, they can't do it, or they'll start with the sound that's at the end instead of the sound that's at the beginning. Those could be red flags too. But again, I'm gonna, in fact, I'll click to that. I know we don't, if there's no other questions right now, or if I didn't answer that for you, whoever asked that question, feel free to, my email is here at the end too. So if you have a specific question about something you're seeing with your child and you wonder if it's a red flag, I can try and answer it better, or in a more specific way.
That was a great answer. We did have another question in the chat as well. What are some of your favorite series for second graders? This person has a reluctant reader and they're looking for some great ideas to read aloud with her.
Okay. Now that's something too that I wish I could pull them all off the top of my head. And Ellie and I were talking about this before we started today, that my kids could tell you like every single book they've ever read ever and the titles to them. And then when I go to try and think of the ones that are the best, it's hard for me to do that. But there are lots of links, as I included there, and that's going to have grade level specific. But my students, you know, of course, always love to read Junie B. Jones in first grade. They would go on to Judy Moody in second grade. And I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but Stink, who is Judy Moody's brother, those are all good ones. I'm trying to think of more off the top of my head. It's tough to do that, but click on those links and really you'll be able to find lists for second grade and beyond and earlier as well.
Yeah,
And
and I
just try them
also
out, bring your child with you to the library and have them thumb through books, read a page aloud to them. And again, also, if you have older siblings, if they have older siblings, and they have favorites, those could become your read alouds.
Mhm. I did also send, there was a PDF I sent with some resources from the library, and one of those is a book list that has read aloud books that you can pick up in the library, kind of divvied up by age group. So feel free to go through that. I will also send out these resources that we're talking about in an email tomorrow so that you can all access them just click from your email. There was one final question that we're going to go ahead and answer real quick. I know we're a few minutes over. But there was a question about if your kids are using a strong phonics program, will telling them to look at the pictures confuse them or aid them? So a question
Well,
about
that's the big controversy, isn't it? That everybody's talking about right now. So, I'm a big believer that they need to use what helps them, what supports them. We don't want them to use the picture in lieu of looking at the words. So I would always direct them to what they notice about the word first. And really, that will help them to strengthen what they know about letters and sounds and patterns and things like that. So I think the controversy comes in where they're looking at the picture first and not noticing the print. So that won't strengthen their decoding skills and their knowledge, which ultimately those pictures go away. So as the text becomes more complex, even if they're pictures, the pictures aren't necessarily going to support the word. So, always direct them to that word. What do you notice? What sounds could it make? Can you stretch it out? And if they can't, and they're scanning the picture and that helps them figure it out, then yay, how did you do that? And then just continue to point out the words to them. That's, what I would do with them.
All right. I think that's all the time that we have for questions. I just want to say a huge thank you to Barb for doing this presentation. We can all give her a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you all again for being so patient. And again, feel free to email me. I'm really, other than I do tutor, but I also watch my grandkids. So one of the ways I really wanted to get involved in my own community was to do this. So again, this was my son's idea. My youngest son said, "Mom, write a proposal for the library." And, Ellie was great helping me, and everybody here has been great. So use these resources and read aloud. That's my final. I read aloud to my kids until they were leaving for college. And as a mother of boys, it was the best thing I ever did. And they're all fluent readers and all avid readers now in their 20s and 30s. So enjoy.
Thanks all so much. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.